Super Week is upon us in the VCT Americas League, and we have 10 games over the next week. But before that happens, we are ranking the panic levels of each fan base of every team. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we are doing VCT Americas panic rankings. I did the same sort of video a couple weeks back before Stage 1 got started, but even though we're just 2 weeks in, there has been quite a lot of change within the region. And I figured that we could do a updated look before Super Week starts, because after Super Week, we're probably going to know which teams are going to playoffs and which teams aren't. So this is the board we have today. We have all 11 teams of the VCT Americas right down below me, and then we have each level of panic. So we have images, mostly Wojaks, to convey the emotion that we're going to be talking about. Starting at the very bottom left, we have the Withered Wojak, so this is down in the dumps, absolute basement. Right above that is regular panic, so panicking but not completely given up. In the middle is the neutral Wojak, so people that are just feeling regular about their team and not super excited or panicked. Then we have copium, so this is happy. You are happy about your team, you're huffing the copium right now. And then at the very top is the Chad Wojak, so teams that are just feeling completely smooth sailing right now. So to start off with the team that I feel like is in the basement, we have Furia. Last time we did this, we didn't have any teams in the basement, even though there was an argument for Furia to be there. I didn't feel like they had to be, but I think now they are. Furia just looked lost out there. They haven't won a match in 2024 so far, and while the loss to Energy is an expected result, they weren't able to beat Crew either. So for a team like Furia, if you're going to be doing anything this year, you have to be able to beat those teams that are kind of in the mid-range of the Americas, Crew being one of them. They weren't able to do it. And even though Nazwar has looked good for this team so far, I don't see that change as putting them over the edge at all. I know they tried to get Pancata, they could not, but it just looks like it's going to be a very long season for Furia fans, and unfortunately, you don't get any reward for being bad like you do in regular sports with drafts and whatnot, so you're just kind of bad. So unfortunate year for Furia so far. I don't know if I see them turning around, but they could. Moving on to a team that has only played one match so far, and it was a very unfortunate situation for them, so I still feel like they're in the same place that they were last time I did this, and that is Loud. So Loud did lose to Energy, but that was an unfortunate situation because most of the team had visa issues and were stuck in Ireland, so they couldn't practice as a full unit. They couldn't really do much without being in LA, so they arrived very quickly before the match actually started, and unfortunately weren't able to get the results. But on the Loud side, it allows me to not take too much away from them because of that loss. And even if they were at full strength, I still think they would probably have lost to Energy. Energy are a very good team, but I still think that we're at the point in the season where we don't really fully know what Loud's going to be, but I still think they're going to be a top 3 team in Americas, and I think their fan base is probably thinking the same thing, just with some concerns that don't put them into the Copium or Chad level. So moving on to a team that was in the panic section last time I did this, but I feel like have at least gone up a little bit, and that is G2. So G2 is in the neutral side of it. G2, a team that has won their first game getting revenge on Evil Geniuses, but then losing an important game against 100 Thieves. So you beat a team that caught you off guard at kickoff, and then you lose to a team that you're hoping to be better than. So it is a bit unfortunate, but G2 definitely look better than they do at kickoff. I don't think the Icy edition has worked out in the way that they've wanted to. It has only been 2 matches for this team, but Icy is struggling in both of those. But this has also allowed Leaf to now become a Sentinel player, and the early returns against EG were really good. The one against 100 Thieves not as good. So I think that there'll still be time to develop how this new constructed roster works. But overall, for fans of this team, I think you're still excited by the possibilities of this team potentially being good, but you're not overly elated and you're not panicked yet. Moving on to a team that I had in the happy section, but can't really justify it now, MIBR. I'm putting them in the panic level. So they've only played one match so far, losing 2-0 to Crew. They did have a break during the first week, and then they played Crew during the second week, and Crew are kind of on a hot streak right now. But that is a team that if you're MIBR, especially with the prep time that you've had over other teams, that's a game that you probably should have won. It's an interesting discussion when it comes to teams that have had a lot of break time versus a lot of playing time. Because the teams that have playing time, there's a lot of VODs on them. Teams can, study the way they play, but they're in mid-season form. They are in form because they are playing the most. Versus teams that have had large breaks, you can have all this prep time, but you're not actually in deep competition, so you're not exactly warmed up to it. So that might be the case for MIBR. While they had a lot of time to prep and a lot of time to chill and practice versus the other teams all playing, it might have hurt them in the long run. So I still think that MIBR can do something. I am higher on this team than most. I think their performance at kickoff was impressive, but it's a long road ahead, and I think there's just a little bit of doubt in the MIBR section. I can't have them in neutral. I can't have them happy again. I think there's definitely panic when it comes to this fan base. Moving on to a team that is in the copium section. I'm honestly surprised that I'm saying this, but Cloud9 look good. C9 so far during the stage 1 have been quite impressive. They've won their first 2 matches, one being an upset victory over Leviathan, and then a solid 2-1 win versus Evil Geniuses. So, maybe you can look at that Evil Geniuses match and them losing that first map as a negative, but you still were able to just grind out that game and win. And that seems to be Cloud9's MO so far, is they lose their first map, they don't really start on time, but they just end up grinding out, adapting, and just winning games just by sheer will. Oxy's been great. Rooney's return has paid off in spades so far. This team looks really good right now. I'm genuinely shocked, but C9 could be a dangerous team, and I think the fan base is pretty happy right now, huffing that copium. Moving on to a team that is honestly hard to call, especially because of the wildly different results that we've seen from them so far, but I'm putting Leviathan in neutral. So last time I did these rankings, Leviathan weren't in the same spot, they were in the neutral section, but Leviathan, after that C9 game, I think there was real reason to be very panicked about this team. They won the first map against C9, they then had the lead in the second map, but then weren't able to pull it through, and then ended up losing in overtime on the third map. It was very sloppy play, it was very concerning to me, and I definitely would have put them in panicked if they had lost against Sentinels, which I thought was a free win for Sentinels. But Leviathan ended up winning that one in an insane overtime match in the first map, and then they just carried that momentum into the second map and were able to beat a very good team 2-0. But I will say about that victory, while it was definitely an improvement for Leviathan, we saw a lot of things we weren't seeing, it was still a pretty sloppy win, and Aspas kind of had to carry. And if that's the win condition for this team, is Aspas going absolutely insane and Sentinels, the other team, not playing at their full potential, then that is definitely a concerning winning condition. You have to have all parts of your team just firing on all cylinders, and so far we haven't really seen that from Leviathan, but they still have some very good top end talent, so they should be a good team, but I still just question the roster construction, and I think if you're a fan of them, you just don't know what to think, so neutral you go. Moving on to a team that I think has had a pretty rough ride of it, Evil Geniuses. So they have a decent performance at kickoff. They were able to beat G2 to make it into playoffs, but then they lose to Loud, but they did take a map. And then so far in stage 1, it just hasn't worked out for them. They lose the rematch against G2 2-0, and then they lose against C9 2-1. So they've only won 1 map in the stage so far. It is only 2 games, but even so, I think we're seeing how this roster just isn't going to be very good. And this is what I was saying about this roster earlier, and my only belief that they would do anything was just Valorant is weird, and they might end up having Potter or Jogamo just do insane things to get this team over the hump. So far, Jogamo has been struggling in the stage. We haven't seen him be at the same level as he was even at kickoff. He had a very good early performance in the year, but he just hasn't looked the same right now. Potter's doing everything she can to get this team a win, and it just hasn't been able to work. I think they need to just go back to the drawing board, get wacky with their compositions, and just try to adapt and do new things, because this team, I'm sorry, they just don't have the top end talent that they did last year. They don't have a team that I think can win off of doing what everybody else is doing. If they're going to go anywhere, I think they have to get wacky, they have to get weird, and I just don't know if I see this team doing much. And I think if you're a fan of this team, maybe your expectations were set a bit too high after kickoff, because teams, it seems like, are figuring out Evil Geniuses pretty easily right now, so you're probably in the panic section. Moving on to a team that I am definitely surprised as to where they are. Crew is in the copium section. Crew have had a great start to stage 1 so far. They've won both their matches so far, and while they haven't faced tough teams, I think this team is finally starting to show that they are out of the basement of Americas. Last year during the regular season, they were the worst team in Americas. They went, I believe it was 0-9. It was just a terrible, awful year for them. But then they had that LCQ run, and then they lost both matches at Champions, so it just didn't end up mattering. I think that was just kind of a flash in the pan run. But I was always thinking that Crew, they have some good pieces. This is a team that could do some damage, and I think they're finally starting to show that. The addition of Heat has worked out perfectly for this team so far. He has added to this team, he's added needed depth, and it seems like Kesnet doesn't have to do everything now. That's been the problem in the past. It's been Kesnet and friends. It's the same situation with Furia and MW Zera. Crew have started to look like a much more well-rounded team, a team that can play really explosively, a team that can do interesting compositions and still find success. They have only beat Furia and MIBR, 2 teams that are right now in the basement of Americas, but that is still a good thing on the side of Crew because you're showing that you're not just a garbage team anymore. I think this team is going to be dangerous. They're up against Evil Geniuses next. That is extremely winnable. If they can get at least 3 wins during the stage, they're in a pretty good spot. I don't know if they win their last 3, but you know, they have Loud, 100 Thieves, and Leviathan after that. It's dicey to say which teams that they can beat out of those 3, but anything is possible. So moving on to the last 3 teams, 100 Thieves, where do they belong? Last time I did this, I had them in the neutral category, and I think they still belong to be there. So they lose that first game of the stage against Sentinels, and yes, it was probably their best chance to beat Sentinels in a very long time. They had been practicing with Curry because John Q team might have not been able to make it, but he eventually does make it in time, and they end up beating 100 Thieves 2-0. So it is an unfortunate loss on the side of 100 Thieves, but at the same time, it's historically a really bad matchup for 100 Thieves. When both teams were bad, Sentinels usually won. When both teams were mid, Sentinels usually won. When both teams were good, Sentinels usually won. You're getting the picture here. So I don't really take it too much away from them because just some teams just do better against other teams. It's just a thing in sports and esports. But then they finally play a game against a team that isn't considered at the top of the Americas in G2, and they end up winning it. So very good win for 100 Thieves there. Cryo's looking really good. EU's looking like a good pickup. Boostio is starting to pick up his play as well. Bane isn't looking fantastic right now. He definitely has some things to clean up, and Asuna right now isn't looking great at all. But there is still time for Asuna to improve, for Boostio to get even better and really fit in with this team. Right now it just seems like the vibes are good in 100 Thieves land. The team looks much better than they do last year. So we'll see how far they can take this, but I think they're in a decent spot right now. So for our last 2 teams, where do Sentinels belong? Last time I did this ranking, they were at the very top over here. But right now, because of that loss against Leviathan, I'm putting them in Copium. So as I said, they won the first game of the stage against 100 Thieves, but then they move on to play Leviathan, a team that was struggling up until that point, and they end up losing 2-0. And not to take too much away from Leviathan, because they did play much better than they had previously, Sentinels, they just weren't playing up to the level that they could. It was very sloppy play from both teams. They had multiple opportunities to win in overtime. They had a great comeback on that first map to even get to overtime. They just weren't playing as tight as they usually do. They weren't as synced, and Aspas being as good as he was just seemed to leave this team in a fluster. Plus they lost the second map. It just felt like whoever was winning that first map was taking the whole match, because that first map was just a match in itself. So unfortunate loss from Sentinels, but do not count this team out. Kaplan is going to just make these guys just go head to the grindstone and just not have that same performance. He's not going to allow that to happen again. So this team is still extremely good. You should have high expectations for this team. Anybody saying that Sen is washed now or whatever, you're just wrong. But for Sentinels, you had a really good start to the season. It's time to prove that that can be a consistent thing throughout this whole year. I think that they can do it. They absolutely have the skill, and they've already won a tournament this year. So I think that the sky's the limit for Sentinels, but I can't put them in the Chad category. Which means our only team in that category is NRG. Now, some energy doubters may be saying, well, they only beat Loud when Loud just came off of visa issues, and then they beat Furia, which is an easy win. And I would agree that those are 2 easy wins, but at the same time, they looked really good during those 2 wins. Loud is a tough out no matter what the situation is. Obviously, they weren't at 100%, but beating them at any opportunity, especially in the way that they did it, is an accomplishment. And beating Furia just reinforces that this team can just dumpster other teams that aren't at the same level as they are. So even though the level of competition that they face so far hasn't been super high, this team looks just absolutely incredibly dangerous right now, no matter who the opponent is. Their next match is against Leviathan, a team that has been very up and down so far. I think they can do it, and they should be able to probably win 3 out of their last 4. It'd be very interesting to see who can beat this team. There's a very good chance that they go perfect. So if they can put themselves in that top spot in their group, then they only need to win 1 to make it to Shanghai. So this team's in a really good spot. They just need to prove that they can be consistent with it. And I think that they absolutely can be. I think them missing out on Madrid just filled this team with anger. So all signs point to NRG potentially being the best team in the entire Americas. Sentinel definitely has something to say about that. So we'll see who ends up being at that top spot throughout the entire year. But if you're an NRG fan, I think you're riding pretty high. They've had a great start. So these are the rankings for each Fanbases panic level. Only 1 in the Doomer slot and only 1 at the chat spot. I think that's I think I did pretty well ranking these teams. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Which teams do you think are in each section? Who's panicked? Who did I overrate their amount of happiness or panic? Please let me know. Please click like if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.